Good morning again. Thank you so much for joining us for our virtual training series on planning and executing tiered instruction for young children with low incidence disabilities. We're really excited for all of these sessions and our first session today. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping so that everyone can have the best virtual learning experience. First of all, I am Carrie Kenningizer. I'm the program coordinator for South Carolina Partnerships for Inclusion, and we are excited that we were able to partner with our friends at the Interagency Deaf Blind Projects and Dr. Jennifer Grisham to offer you this training series. So this session is being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants by next week so that you can review it, or if you missed it live, you can watch it at your leisure. All attendee video and microphones have been muted, so you don't have to worry about that. If you have a question, you can use the chat box at the bottom to put your question there, and we'll do our best to answer your questions in real time. We might wait a moment and let Dr. Grisham answer them, but if we don't have an answer, we'll get back to you as soon as possible. After the session is over, you will receive a link in the chat box to complete a brief evaluation to provide feedback on the training today. And as a reminder, if you signed up to receive CEUs and/or child care training credit through SC Endeavors, you must view this whole session in its entirety. And if you have questions, you can email us at Skippy, which is scpi@mailbox.sc.edu. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Dr. Grisham. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carrie, and it's nice to be with you all today and to talk about this topic. I was fortunate enough in the past spring to work with colleagues from South Carolina and my colleague Donna Carpenter here in Kentucky to think a little bit about what tiered instruction looks like for children with low incidence disabilities. And we decided that we wanted to expand on that topic a little bit more. And so I'm really pleased to be a part of this venture. Today, I'm going to be really spending a lot of time giving you a lot of information. And next week, we're going to spend time planning tiered instruction for young children with low incidence disabilities. And then hopefully by January, you will have implemented some of the strategies that I will be teaching you, and we'll be looking at the effectiveness of those. My name is Jennifer Grisham Brown, and I am a professor at the University of Kentucky. This is a little bit of overview about the many hats that I wear at the University of Kentucky. I am a professor and work in undergraduate and graduate programs in interdisciplinary early childhood education, where we train children with and without disabilities, birth through 5 years of age. I'm also the faculty director of an inclusive early childhood program that's based on campus for children, again, between the ages of birth to 5 years of age. I'm also the principal investigator and project director for the Kentucky Deaf Blind Project, and have been providing technical assistance and training and support and now coaching for teachers and families for many years now. I also do a lot of work internationally in supporting inclusive practices around the world, most recently in Spain, in South Africa, and where my heart is and where my background is in Guatemala, where I co-founded a children's home and a preschool and take students every year there, well, except for this year. Finally, I'm a mom and recently married, and so I've become a grandmother as well. So I'm happy to be with you all and to share a little bit about my life experiences and some of the work that I've done that I think impacts what I'm going to be telling you about in the last couple of days. So just a little bit about an overview of the training series. So today is very content laden. We're going to be talking about the pyramid model, which is a tiered model that I think many of you all are familiar with. And we're going to use that kind of as the basis of thinking about how we would conceptualize that model for students who have low incidence disabilities. We're also going to be really focusing on tier 3 supports. So those supports that are more intensive, more individualized instruction that we apply to the most high priority skills that we teach young children who have low incidence disabilities. And so that's where we're going to spend the majority of our time. Next time we meet, which is next week, we're going to be creating intervention plans, which are kind of like our roadmap for how to implement tier 3 instruction. And I often say to people that I think of an intervention plan as being kind of like a recipe. I think a lot of times we believe that we are implementing interventions with fidelity and we're implementing them consistently. But in fact, it's not until we actually write down every step of what we're supposed to do, which is critically important, especially when we're working with children who have low incidence disabilities, that we're actually able to see a difference in children's outcomes. And so we will be spending some time learning about what an intervention plan is and then how to implement it. And then in our third session in January, we will hopefully, between now and then, have given an opportunity for you all to implement your interventions. And we're going to look at the degree with which you feel like you're able to implement that intervention plan with fidelity, and also its impact on children. And we talk a lot in the field of early childhood education and education in general about implementation science, which is a combination of fidelity of implementation and how that impacts the outcomes of children. And so we're going to be looking at that more in January. So today, content. Next time, we're going to be planning. And then the third session, we're going to be looking at implementation. So our focus for today is an overview of the pyramid model as it's applied to young children with low incidence disabilities. And then also talking about those tier 3 interventions with a focus on teaching social emotional skills and communication skills to young children who have low incidence disabilities. So what is the pyramid model? I think that certainly in South Carolina and hopefully from wherever you hail, if you're watching this, you've heard about the pyramid model. This is work that's been around for probably 25 years that looks at how to build supports for children and how to promote social emotional competence of young children. And there are many resources out there related to the pyramid model. This is not a training about the pyramid model. I'm not a pyramid model trainer, but conceptually, I've been thinking about how to apply tiered instruction for young children with low incidence disabilities for a very long time. And what you'll see is that in all of these tiered models is this notion that there has to be some kind of a strong foundation in place in order for other types of interventions to be effective. So in the case of the pyramid model, at the very, very base of the pyramid is an effective workforce, systems and policies that are in effect so that we can build on and develop interventions for children that build on their social emotional competence. At the bottom tier of the tiered support is high quality supportive environments and nurturing and responsive relationships. And so for those of you out there who are familiar with developmentally appropriate practices, you know that this is foundation to everything that we do in early childhood, is to ensure that we have a high quality physical and social environment that works for young children, and that we have relationships between adults and children that are nurturing and responsive to their needs. We build on top of that to targeted supports, which is where, in the case of the pyramid model, we are teaching social skills that have a remedial effect on trying to build that social competence. And so we sometimes refer to these as tier 2 supports for children. And then at the top is assessment-based intervention that results in behavior support plans for children who have challenging behavior that need those additional supports that is built upon the other supports that are in the classroom. So we've been thinking a lot over the last year about how this model can be applied to children who have low incidence disabilities. And so on the next few slides, I'm going to share with you our thoughts about how that might look. If we're talking about at the very foundation or at the base of this, we're looking at an effective workforce. And so what does an effective workforce look like that's working with children with low incidence disabilities? And here I'm talking about children who have sensory impairments. I'm talking about children who have physical disabilities. I'm talking about children who have intellectual disabilities. I'm talking about children who have dual sensory impairments. And for that population of children, there's some basic knowledge that needs to be in place in order for that workforce to be effective. And the things that they need to know about specifically are interaction strategies, how to interact with children if they don't perceive their world in the same way that other children do because of sensory impairments. How do you interact with children who also may have physical disabilities and cannot interact with their world like typically developing young children can? And so the people that are working with these children have to know how to interact effectively with those children so that they can build those responsive relationships that are so key to high quality instruction for any young child. They also need to know how to adapt the environment so that it is effective and that it works for young children. So they need to know adaptations that are specific for specific disabilities, for those children who have visual impairments, for children who have deaf and hard of hearing, for children who have physical disabilities, for children who maybe are on the spectrum. They need to know what those basic adaptations are that are needed in order for them to be successful in a classroom. And they also need to know the impact of the disability on those relationships, which feeds back into those interaction strategies. Listed here are some resources for ensuring an effective workforce. The National Center for Deaf Blindness is where those of us who work in dual sensory impairment find many of the resources that are so effective and helpful to us in how to build those relationships, how to make adaptations, and how to develop instruction for children who have deaf blindness. Related to that is the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which has a wealth of resources that are available for children who have sensory impairments. A couple of other resources that are out there that are also very helpful. The National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations. And I just recently reviewed that website again, and there is just a wealth of information in there about how to promote social emotional competence for young children. All the current research on social emotional development is in that particular website, and so I encourage to use that to help build your workforce. And then the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, ECTA, is also a wonderful resource that talks about other types of tiered models for young children and also discusses evidence-based practices and other types of research that can help us in developing a workforce that is grounded in working with children who have low incidence disabilities. So that's our foundation. The next tier, which are these two blue lines that are right here, have to do with building a high quality environment and a high quality relationships between children. And so because my background, and I've worked a lot with children who are deaf blind, we talk a lot in that field, but it's also true for children who have other low incidence disabilities about the importance of trusting relationships. And so what that means is that the way that we interact with children is in such a way that is respectful of the way that they receive information, that we don't deliver information to children erratically and confusing to them, that we are consistent in how we interact with those children. And so I've listed for you here some things to consider as you are developing those relationships and being consistent with your interactions with those children. By first of all, establishing attention and introducing yourself and making sure that a child, particularly those with sensory impairments, know who you are and have a way of understanding who you are. That also that you provide information in a way that's understandable to the child. For children with low incidence disabilities, verbal communication is oftentimes not the best way for them to receive input. And so we oftentimes have to also give them information either through pictures or through verbal information combined, or by using sign language or tactile symbols. And so determining the best way to give information to children is a really important step in building those trusting relationships. We also have to be respectful of children's non-communicative attempts to communicate. There was a book that used to be on my shelf for many years called Every Movement Counts. And the basis of that book was that everything that a child does should be considered communicative. And especially for our children who have very low incidence disabilities that perhaps are not able to move around their environment and able to use sign language or other symbolic forms of communication. Sometimes it might just be a change in their muscle tone that gives us information about what it is that a child is trying to say. And so a child who flinches and turns away can be saying to us, I don't want that anymore, or get out of my face, or I'm bored. I don't want to do that anymore. Or a child that smiles and relaxes their muscle tone might be saying, this feels good to me. I enjoy this. And so we have to look at that muscle tone. We have to look at their movements. We have to look at their vocalizations and consider that all of those may be communicative attempts. When you don't have control over your body, when you have impaired sensory channels, then you look to and you use any mode of communication possible to get your messages apart. And so at the basis of developing those trusting relationships, we have to acknowledge those attempts to communicate. We also have to give children opportunities for choice. Donna Carpenter and I are working with a family right now, and we had a nice discussion last week about how important it is for children to have opportunities for choice, because through choice, children have control. And when I can't manipulate and work in my environment the way that perhaps other children can, then I oftentimes need some way of exerting control. And oftentimes children exert control in ways that are not acceptable to those that live with them and work with them. So by giving children choice, we give them control. And so throughout their day and throughout their activities, we need to give them chances to give a voice to what they want to do. The other thing that is so critical is appropriate wait time to process information. And this is unique to every single child, and is something we're going to return to next week when we start doing intervention planning. But wait time is one of the key indicators of instruction that we have to consider in order to be effective, especially when working with this population. And I'm going to talk more about that later. And then opportunities to communicate, opportunities to give messages to us, not just about whether or not they want to go to the potty or they want to eat, but also about what feels comfortable to them, what they like and what they don't like. I had a speech therapist say to me one time, do you think that the only thing that a child wants to talk about is going to the potty? Yet oftentimes that's the first thing that we try to teach children, but rather they want to talk about the things that they're interested in, just like other children do. And it's our responsibility to try to figure out a way for them to tell us that. So at the basis of everything that we do with children are these trusting relationships. Also, as part of Tier 1, are thinking about the practice.
Carrie, sorry to interrupt you, but can we take a moment to do an interpreter switch?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think we're all set.
Thank you. Also, at Tier 1, we're talking about the quality of the environment. And in addition to ensuring that all children, regardless of whether they have low incidence disabilities or not, are engaged in high quality, developmentally appropriate classrooms. In addition to that, we need to also think about offering children opportunities to be with children who are proficient communicators. And so one of the reasons why I've dedicated my career to the notion of inclusion is because I truly believe in that children who do not verbally communicate do better at learning communication skills when they are around children that are their same age peers that communicate in a symbolic way. And so giving children those opportunities is something that's really critical. Also using appropriate technology so that they can interact with, that they can engage with, that they can access the environment. And so depending on the disability of the child, those might include listening devices, appropriate seating near the group for a child who's visually impaired, calendar systems for children that have dual sensory impairments, or also for children who have ASD, visual adaptations for children who have visual impairments, and communication systems, of course, for any child who is nonverbal communicator. Consistency, consistency, consistency is so critical for this population. And so having a classroom that's consistent, where things stay in place and don't change all the time, and having a schedule that is consistent is really important for this group of children. I am a person who doesn't believe in the notion that we need to begin every day of a young child's classroom experience with going over the days of the week and the months of the year. I know, because of my background in child development, that children don't understand that concept until they're age 7. And so I'm not a fan of that. However, I am a fan of schedules, and I am a fan of teachers spending and starting their day by talking about what comes next in the day, and also talking about when that activity ends and what comes next. And so starting your day with going over your daily schedule is a Tier 1 practice for all children. And then books about children with low incidence disabilities. A quick Google search will yield many, many really wonderful children's books that need to be part of a classroom, so that whether there's a child with a low incidence disability in your class now, or there will be in the future, it's a form of diversity. It's a way of thinking about diversity when we talk about the different ways that children move around their environment, the different ways that children access information, the different ways that children learn. Those are things that all children need to be a part of. Moving on then to Tier 2, I have a couple of ideas that are specific for working with children with low incidence disabilities. So one way is to establish some kind of a buddy system in your classroom, where you pair a child with low incidence disability with a specific peer. And all of you who have been teaching for a period of time have probably met children that sometimes I hear people refer to them, she's the little mother of the classroom, or I've heard teachers say, well, she could run the classroom because she knows everybody. And so thinking about those children who already are showing some signs of leadership, and pairing them with a child who has low incidence disability and has a desire to develop a relationship with the child who has the low incidence disability is something that you can use as a strategy. Also, there's some nice work that's been out there on Circle of Friends. Some of you all may have heard of person-centered planning or other forms of strengths-based models that really look at how to plan for children who have low incidence disabilities. And one of these was specifically designed for trying to support the inclusion of and build friendships around children who have low incidence disabilities is called Circle of Friends. And I'm not going to have time to show this video today, but basically what happens is that we bring around a child in a classroom, a group of children who have gotten to know that child well. And we start thinking about who are the people in that child's life who can build supports for that child, who can, oftentimes come up with some of the adaptations for how to support that child that we can't even come up with. And so Circles of Friends is a whole process of bringing together those children and those people that know that child well to think about how to help that child participate, how to help that child communicate with the people that are around them, and how to build true relationships. There's a lot of work in the field of low incidence disabilities around peer tutoring and peer supports. And sometimes those peer supports turn into this kind of helper, helping the child kind of thing. What we're talking about here and what is talked about in the pyramid model around tier 2 is really around building relationships and building true friendships, so that particularly in communities where children are going to be going to the same school, perhaps their entire school career, those people actually are developing hopefully lifelong relationships with those children to support them throughout their career in school. So those are some suggestions for tier 2 practices. And then what we're going to be really spending the bulk of our time talking about are tier 3 practices. And these are, again, you notice the words intensive instruction. And intensive instruction here are, we're talking about the instruction that is implemented with intensity, but also with enough individualization so that the child is able to actually learn important skills that are going to help them be successful in whatever environments that they're spending time. And so one of the things that's talked about a great deal in the pyramid model is a functional behavioral assessment. And functional, or FBAs, as they're referred to in the world of challenging behavior, if you will, is to try to figure out what the function is of a specific behavior. Going back to my what I talked about a few minutes ago, I mentioned that the book that we used to use called Every Movement Counts. And that was really, our early version of an FBA, because what Every Movement Counts said basically was that everything that a child does has a purpose. And so the FBA model is really talking about trying to figure out what is the purpose of what a child is doing. We use this a lot of times with children who have challenging behavior, because we don't think that children are necessarily bad and that they're displaying challenging behavior just because, there's something wrong with them, but that there's a reason for why they are doing that. And so with an FBA, there are usually 3 kind of categories of behavior that we might say explain why a child is doing something. And so the first is in the area of sensory. And so is there something missing from the child's sensory environment that they are seeking by doing the behavior that they are doing? And so a lot of times, for example, children will engage in self-injurious behavior, where I've seen children who have banged their head or hit their head on a table, and they do that over and over again. That particular behavior is sometimes seen as being sensory seeking, where, for whatever reason, they're getting some kind of a sensory feedback from a behavior like that. And so I'm not saying that that's always the case, but that's an example of a behavior that is sometimes seen to serve that function of sensory seeking. Many, many times children engage in behavior because they're trying to communicate a message that we don't understand. And so an outcome of a functional behavioral assessment oftentimes is to figure out, what is not only the function of that behavior, what is the reason that the child is doing that, what is the message that the child is trying to get across? Is the child, for example, trying to gain our attention in some way? Is the child trying to make a request? Is the child trying to tell us that they don't want to do something anymore? Is the child trying to tell us that they are bored? Is the child trying to tell us that they are frustrated? And so the outcome of a functional behavioral assessment is to not only figure out what the function of that behavior is, but also then to identify replacement behaviors so that we can give the child more acceptable ways of seeking sensory information or gaining attention or communicating their wants and needs. And so for children, particularly children who have challenging behavior, a function behavioral assessment is one of the first things that we do as a Tier 3 strategy. The other thing that we do at Tier 3 is that we teach. We teach social emotional skills and we teach social communication skills. And so what I've done here is that I've actually listed for you all, some of the social communication and social emotional skills that we teach children who have low incidence disabilities. There was a study that was done many years ago that looked at an analysis of IEPs. And what they found with the IEPs is that although a great majority of children who are receiving early childhood services for special education are receiving those services because of social emotional delays, there was a very low percentage of social emotional goals that were on that IEP. And I think that the reason for that partially is because it's tough to really quantify and articulate what social emotional skills are. And so what I've done in this presentation is that I've listed those out for you all. Another role that I have, another hat that I wear, is that I've been involved in the development of a curriculum-based assessment now for about the last 10 years. And so we've gone through multiple iterations with expert panels and et cetera, to try and kind of figure out what are the particular skills that children need in order to be successful between the ages of birth to 6. In the area of social emotional, these are the goals that we've come up with. That first of all, children need to learn how to initiate and maintain social interactions with peers. And so if we were writing a goal about that, of course, we would have to identify how a child is going to initiate, because I'm sure all of you all know that children initiate social interactions, but sometimes it's not in the way that we find acceptable. And so what are acceptable ways that we want to teach children to initiate a social interaction? And then how can a child with a low incidence disability maintain those social interactions with children? And so defining what that looks like as well. Participating in familiar routines with caregivers and adults. I did a training several years ago in Texas, and I had the teachers, they were developing intervention plans, much like you all will be doing. And when we got to social emotional skills, one of the goals that many of the kindergarten teachers and preschool teachers identified was participating in routines. Knowing how, when they come into the room in the morning, knowing how to put their book bag away, knowing how to take off their coat, knowing that there was some folder that was something that was important in all of the different programs, knowing to put the folder in a certain way, and knowing to go to their place on the carpet and choose a book to read while everyone else got there. And that social routine was very important for these teachers, for their children to learn. I'm sure that any of you who are working in home-based situations that have those social routines that families really want their children to engage with. A teacher that I'm working with right now, she's really struggling and trying to support one of the children in her classroom because they're doing it virtually, probably like many of you all. And one of the main things that the mother wants, she has 4 children under the age of 5, is for her child to follow a social routine, to be able to get up in the morning and be able to do a few things for himself while she's trying to attend to the children that are younger than that child. And so following routines and participating in them is a really important step in our child's social emotional development. Also using strategies to manage emotional states. And so many of you all have worked with children who have very high emotional states and are very upset all the time. And so teaching children how to regulate their emotional state is something that is very important for us to teach. Children with low incidence disabilities oftentimes go from 0 to 100 very quickly. And so that shows a lack of regulation. And so how do we teach children to calm themselves down? How do we teach them strategies for how to get themselves to a space where they are able to concentrate and to attend to what's going on around them? And then initiating and maintaining cooperative activities with peers. You'll notice as I've got these listed here that these are actually in a developmental hierarchy. And so, these are the things that we would kind of, teach in some kind of an order. But the ways in which we teach them and the behaviors that we teach are going to be different depending on the child. Interacting with others and materials during large and small group as children move toward kindergarten from preschool, then being able to engage with materials appropriately. Some of you all may have worked with children who seem to tear up everything in our classrooms. And so engaging with materials in an appropriate way is something that we have to maybe teach some of the children that we're working with. And responding to the beginning or to instruction to begin or finish an activity. We work on this skill a great deal with children who have dual sensory impairments to understand the beginning and then the middle and then the end of an activity is something that's very important to understanding a schedule and understanding how to be consistent in our interactions with children. So those are social emotional skills that I want you all to start thinking about over the coming week, because we're going to be targeting one of these skills in the development of our intervention plan. So be thinking about a child or a group of children that you're working with that really needs some help in social emotional, and be thinking about, which skill or set of skills that you would like to really focus on during our time that we're together. So here's an example of a social emotional goal for a child who has low incidence disabilities. Don't pay attention to if you're in a state where this doesn't look like the format of your goals, that's okay. I want you to attend to the behavior, and I want you to attend to the behavior form that I focused on in this particular goal. So by the end of the IEP of this year, when a peer introduces themselves to Savannah, so when a child comes up to and approaches Savannah, who is the target child, she will reach her hand toward the peer within 10 seconds. And then here's the skill: to initiate a social interaction with the peer, 4 or 5 opportunities over 3 days as measured by a checklist. And so the skill that we're trying to change here for this child is to initiate a social interaction. The way that we're going to do that, that she's going to demonstrate this, because there's 1,000 different ways that a child can initiate a social interaction. They can say hi, they can say the child's name, they can give a hug to a child, they can hit a child, as I've seen some children do. But for Savannah, who has low incidence disabilities, for Savannah, who can't verbalize and say hello to her friends, who can't reach her arms out and hug her friend, the way that she's going to do that is she's going to reach her hand toward the peer to acknowledge that her friend, that her friend initiated that interaction, and to show that she is initiating it with her peer. Carrie, I think that I saw somebody raise their hand. Do you want to see if there's a question at this point?
Sure, and we can actually use this time to do an interpreter switch. I can't see the hand raised, Jennifer, but I will ask, people are curious if we can share these slides as a PDF after you're finished. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I sent them to you that way, maybe.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
I have them. So everyone, we will share the recording and a copy of the slides after this session is over.
Okay.
Okay, looks like we're all, we're not all set. We're good?
All right.
Hold on one second. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just say that that if you all do have questions, to please put those in the chat box, and that would be great. I'd be happy to answer those questions.
And I just want to remind you, Dr. Grisham, if you have any poll questions, just let me know when to put them up.
Okay, I sure will. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So another part of what I call Tier 3 practices is to teach specific social communication skills. And so again, from the work that I've done in the development of a curriculum-based assessment, we've come up with sort of a hierarchy of skills in social communication. And when we talk about social communication, there are two aspects that we always have to think about. The first aspect is that we have to think about the form of communication. And I've alluded to this several times throughout our time together already, that there are many, many different ways that children try to get messages across to us. They may do it with eye gaze, they may do it with spoken word, they may do it with sign language, they may do it with sign approximations, they may do it with vocalizations, they may do it with reaching and grabbing, they may do it with touching a picture. There are many, many different ways that children communicate with us. The population that we're talking about in this series are children who have low incidence disabilities that are going to be using less concrete or less symbolic forms of communication than other children. And so for that reason, we have to think about, how am I going to teach this child or shape that movement or that gesture or that sign approximation into something that is actually communication for that child. And so we have to know what the form of communication is that I'm going to teach the child. The second thing that we have to look at is we have to look at the functions or the reasons that children communicate. So why is it that a child wants to get a message across to us? And you'll notice that in these skills, in this set of skills that we've included those. So in addition to using language to initiate and maintain social interaction, we've got that the child communicates a variety of messages, including requesting an event, requesting an object, requesting a person. So requesting is really important. Making choices, as I've already talked about, is really important for children who have low incidence disabilities to feel that they have some control over their environment. Expressing the desire to continue an activity. So one of the things that we teach children very early on, who are early communicators, is that desire to continue an activity. So an example that I can think of that we do oftentimes is that if you have a child that you're working with, a parent might have the child on their knee and they bounce that child up and down and up and down and up and down. And then they stop. And then they wait. And they see if that child does anything at all to continue that activity, to express that they want that activity to start again. And it may be something as simple as a little nudge of their shoulders. It may be that they turn and look at their parent. It may be that they laugh. It may be that they sign more. But trying to get that child to continue that interaction with someone who is important in their life is a very, very important first step for early communication. So continuing an activity. And then also very, very important is negation and protest. All children should have the right to say, don't do that to me. I don't like that. I'm finished. I'm bored. That's a very important message that children have the right to get across to us. So those are some of the functions or the reasons that children communicate. Also, following directions, being able to follow single-step directions or multi-step directions is another communication skill. Responding to the initiation of others. And so if someone initiates a contact with them, then will that child do that? And then engaging in turn taking, communication turn taking. So having that understanding that I do something, then you do something, you say something, and then I do something again is an important early communication skill. And then being able to ask questions and describe events. So these are more sophisticated functions, functions or reasons that a child communicates is to get information and also to tell people about what's happening in their world. Oftentimes with our children who have deaf blindness, what we will do is that we will develop, storybooks that have items in it, from maybe a trip that a child took. And it might be, objects in there that were related to that trip. So that child has a way to describe things that happen in their day or on a special trip that they took. And so giving children opportunities when they can't sit down and talk like maybe a typical 3-year-old, but giving them a way to express what's happened in their day is an important communication skill that we can be teaching children who have low incidence disabilities. So an example of an IEP goal that one is for, that should say social communication, I'm sorry, not social emotional, is that by the end of the IEP and when the child wants more food, activity, or drink, Peter will request that he wants more by making sign approximations for more, 9 of 10 opportunities for 3 consecutive days as measured by a checklist. And so my function or my reason that I want him to communicate is about when he wants more of something to eat, something to drink, or an activity that he prefers. And then the form of communication that he's going to use to make that message clear to me is to use a sign approximation for more. So form and function is really important to consider for both social emotional and social communication skills. All right, Carrie, I am going to stop right here and have you do a couple of polls for me. I didn't at the beginning, I failed to do the polls to find out exactly who is in our audience, and I apologize for that. I really want to know a little bit more about the role that you play in early childhood. And I also want to know a little bit about what your specific location is, where you teach or where you work. So if we can put those 2 polls up, I'd like to see what those are. As I start talking about evidence-based practices, it will be really helpful to me to have some idea to understand a little bit more about what you do and what experiences you might have in implementing evidence-based practices for children with low incidence disabilities. We have a lot of other folks. I wonder what, a lot of folks, I don't know if you all are parents, if you are, no parents, administrators perhaps. A lot of folks from public school. Okay. Looks like
if you're an other, sorry, this is Carrie jumping in. If you're an other, I see people putting it in the chat. Why don't you go ahead and do that so we can see who you are?
Yeah, that'd be great. You want to read a couple of those to me, Carrie?
Sure, and I apologize. I realized I didn't put administrator on here. So we do have lots of administrators,
Cool.
special education coordinators. We have some coaches and technical assistance providers.
Okay, super.
And we also have some representation from the South Carolina Department of Education and our deafblind project friends, psychologists. Yeah, lots of great folks participating today. Thank you for joining us.
All right, wonderful. Okay, we can take that down now. Do I click out of it? Okay. They're teaching me all the time. All right. Looks like the majority of you all work with public school. But hello to our Head Start friends and childcare. Great to have you all. So one of the things that I've been really involved with throughout my career is trying to teach people to use evidence-based practices. In the world of special education and education in general, everything that we do right now seems to be couched in this notion that we need to be implementing scientifically based or evidence-based practices with young children or with young children with disabilities. And so I've been involved in my research and in my teaching, thinking about, what are the evidence-based practices that really work for young children. And so on this slide here, what you'll see is a table that I put together for some other work that I'm doing that really highlights kind of the main set of practices that fall into that tier 3 category that have research around them for teaching young children a variety of different skills. And so what you'll see in the left-hand corner are the actual evidence-based practices. I've been surprised as I've gone around the country and trained people on working with children with low incidence disabilities at the number of people that really haven't heard of some of these practices. I feel like that it's one of the reasons why I was excited to share this information with you all is that I think it is possible that you may have heard of some form of the practice, but this is what we should all have in our toolkit. If we are working with children who have low incidence disabilities, we need to know what these words mean. We need to, when we are struggling with how to effectively teach a child who has autism spectrum disorder, a child who has deaf blindness, a child who has intellectual disabilities, a child who has multiple disabilities, then this should be our go-to for practices for how to effectively teach them. And I can show you many studies where we have taught a variety of teachers. When I did my own dissertation many years ago, I trained teaching assistants in inclusive preschool classrooms to use some of the practices that are listed here to teach important skills to young children who have deaf blindness. And so these are practices that are highly effective for teaching children important skills. The first 3 at the top are really skills that are more in the area we think of more in teaching children when we're working on behavior. And so I'm not going to focus on them as much. They're highly specialized practices other than the first one, which is differential reinforcement. But correspondence training and high probability request are used to teach a lot of social and behavior skills. So what you see in the left-hand column is you see the practice. In the right-hand column, from what I did is I did a thorough review of the research, and I looked at the skills that particular procedure had been used to teach. And so, for example, with differential reinforcement, which is reinforcing the appropriate behavior that we want to teach a child, that's been used to teach play skills, to teach engagement skills, and to teach a child to appropriate behavior skills. As we go down the list here, we have a set of practices that are sometimes referred to as milieu teaching practices or naturalistic language intervention practices. And those practices, of course, have been used primarily to teach language and communication skills. There's a set of practices that are called response prompting procedures. And so graduated guidance, system of least prompts, time delay, simultaneous prompting are all part of that family of response prompting procedures. And you'll see again in the right-hand column, you'll see that those are particular procedures that have been used to teach a variety of play skills, language skills, communication skills, and also some early academic skills. And then peer-mediated instruction has been primarily used to teach, of course, social skills. So in selecting what we were going to focus on for this series, I selected 3 sets of procedures that have primarily been used to teach social communication and social emotional skills. So today I'm going to be overviewing for you the first set of procedures, which is enhanced milieu teaching or naturalistic language intervention. And we're going to be talking about how those procedures are worked to teach early communication skills. I'm also going to be highlighting for you system of least prompts, which was primarily used when I was teaching many years ago to teach adaptive skills to children, but more recently in the literature is being used to teach play skills, such as sharing and turn taking. And then finally, we'll be talking about time delay procedures, which have been used to teach play skills, communication skills, as well as a variety of other skills in other developmental areas. Before I start talking about the enhanced milieu teaching strategies, I'd like for Carrie to put up a poll to see what you know about that particular set of procedures. So Carrie, if you'll put up the poll about enhanced milieu teaching and your familiarity with that, I'd like for you all to do that very quickly for me. So this is very similar to the type of data that I see from that I see when I'm doing other types of training, that many times there is not a lot of familiarity with the procedures that we're going to be talking about today. While our focus today is on working with children with low incidence disabilities, this first set of procedures I'm going to talk about has its roots really in working with children who have language delays, a variety of different language delays. And so I'm glad that I'm going to be teaching you something that you don't know a lot about. So we'll start with talking about milieu teaching.
And Jennifer, I'm just going to pop in right now and we'll do a quick interpreter switch before you get started.
All right.
Looks like we're good to go.
All right. So you'll notice by this reference here that this is an old procedure. It's been around for a very long period of time. Some of you all may have heard of the research by Hart and Risley that was done in the 90s around looking at what's often referred to as the 30 million word gap. And the 30 million word gap suggests that there is a gap in the number of words that children from low income homes hear on a daily basis versus children from middle and upper income homes. And that research, that seminal research, if you will, has been replicated over time. It's also been replicated even for children who have cochlear implants, to find that children who have cochlear implants from low-income homes do fare more poorly than children from middle and upper income homes in terms of their use of using their cochlear implant. And so, so that research that was done in the 90s really set into motion some of the research that's been done on how to teach language to children who have language deficits from an early age. Enhanced milieu teaching has been around for teaching that group of children, but also children with a variety of disabilities since the late 70s. And the way that it works is that an adult purposefully and intentionally manipulates the environment to create opportunities for children to use their language skills. And so it is, when I start explaining to you all some of the aspects of enhanced milieu teaching, my guess might be that you say, oh, I do that all of the time. I just didn't know what it was called. Because I think that some of the things that we'll discuss are things that teachers innately do to try to provide opportunities for children to communicate. All of this series, however, is about intentionality and about making sure that we don't just think we're doing it, but make sure that we are intentionally creating opportunities for children to have those opportunities. So there are three elements to enhanced milieu teaching. The first is environmental arrangement techniques. The second is responsive interaction techniques, and then prompting strategies. So I'll talk about each of these. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Oh, goodness. Okay. I think I've had a couple of extra slides in there. I'll take that out before you send it. So the first element is responsive interaction techniques. I talked about early on that the basis of all good, high quality social emotional environments for young children is to have responsive interactions with children. And so this is at the basis of everything that we do with young children, but it's also at the basis of this particular technique. And so when we talk about responsive interaction, we're talking about following a child's lead. So I mentioned earlier the importance of engaging in conversations with children about things that they care about, that they're interested in, that they're motivated by. And the way that we do that is by watching children and following their lead and trying to figure out what they enjoy and commenting on what they're doing. And, you know, and just saying, oh, I see you like the music, or you're telling me that you're really enjoying playing with that particular toy. So following a child and commenting on what they're doing is really at the heart of building those responsive interactions with children. And as I've also said, responding to their communicative attempts. And so for that little child that is shrugging their shoulders when the parent stops bouncing them on their knees saying, oh, wow, you're telling me that you want to have some more bouncing. So responding to those and then starting the bouncing again is a way that we can respond and hear the child and let them know that we are hearing what message they're trying to get across to them. And then providing language models for them is also part of that as well. So the purpose is to support those interactions between peers and teachers and between the child and that has a language delay or communication need. So that's element one, is building those responsive interaction strategies. The second element, which I think is the fun part of teaching communication skills to young children, is the environmental arrangement strategies. The first one is limiting access. So I know that when we teach about developmentally appropriate practice, we talk about things like making sure that children have access to materials that are at their height and in their field of vision and so forth. With this particular strategy, though, we're going to limit access to something that a child really desires. And we can limit access in a variety of ways. For a child, if they have the vision and they have the ability to move around their environment, we might limit access by putting a favorite toy or a favorite something on a shelf that's a little bit too high for the child to reach. And what this does is it creates an opportunity for the child to have to request something, which is what we're doing with our environmental arrangement strategies. We might also put something in a container that is clear, something that a child really, really wants, but the child can't get inside of that container unless they ask for somebody to do it. We might put the lid on top of a container that the child can't get off. But by limiting access to something that the child really desires, that we're giving the child an opportunity to create an opportunity for them to communicate. The other thing that we can do is that we can create an unexpected event. Sometimes these are called silly situations. For example, if I'm trying to get a child to comment on something, then I might say, I think I'm going to wear your coat today, and then attempt to put the child's coat that's way too small for me on them. Or I may try to put my shoe on the child's shoe on my foot. I might say to the child, today we're going to do something that we would normally not do, to see if the child acknowledges and recognizes that the event that I've come up with is something that is outside of the regular schedule. So developing and creating an unexpected event is also a way that we can create an opportunity for a child to communicate. One that we oftentimes use is insufficient materials. And so with insufficient materials, what we're doing is we're creating a situation where perhaps a child is getting ready to do an activity, but they can't do it because a key material that they need to do that activity is missing. So it's breakfast time, and we're going to have cereal for breakfast, but there's no spoon there. Or we're going to do an art activity today, but there are no paints there. Or we're going to, another way that we oftentimes do this is that we give the child small portions of something that the child really likes to eat or drink. And then we take that away from them, creating an opportunity for the child to have to communicate that they want more of something. So these very simple strategies create the opportunity. And then what we have to do with element 3 then is to prompt the child so that the child can, in fact, get practice with what it is that the form of communication that the child is going to use. So the prompting strategy that we're going to talk about is where we're using a man model strategy to promote forms of communication across routines and activities for children that don't initiate communication. And so with a man model strategy, what we're going to do is that we're going to ask a child a question. So if the child doesn't have a spoon and the child's going, or they're reaching for something, or they're trying to eat with their hands, or they're otherwise communicating, I don't have something important here that I need in order to communicate, then we're going to ask the child a question and say, what do you want or what do you need? That's the MAND part of the man model strategy. And then we're going to wait. This is going to be a recurrent theme, and what I'm going to be teaching you is wait, wait, wait. And then if the child doesn't do anything, then we're going to model for the child whatever form of communication that we're trying to teach. If I'm trying to teach the child a sign, then I might teach a sign. If I'm trying to teach a child, to point to a picture, then I might point to a picture. If I'm trying to get a child to touch a switch that says, I want more, I want a spoon, then I model for the child how to touch the switch. So MAND model is the strategy. It's not the only prompting strategy as part of the enhanced milieu teaching, but it's the one that we've used the most, I would say, in some of the research that I've done. So here are the steps of the MAN model procedure. I do want to point out for you here, right here, there's a book that Belva Collins, a former colleague of mine, wrote that's got some wonderful step-by-step steps for each of the procedures that I'm going to be talking to you about today. And so if you need a reference to go back to and you can't find everything you need in my PowerPoint, then that's a wonderful reference that you can look to. So with the MAN model procedure, the first thing that we do is when the child shows interest in something that's going on, we want to establish joint attention. And that's essential to every single one of these procedures that we're going to talk about today, is the child has to be paying attention to what is going on. And it has to be something that they are focused on and that they are interested in. So we have to establish joint attention first. Then the child gives the command or asks the question. Now, the way in which the teacher or the parent asks the question is really going to be dependent on the child, the way that the child receives information. And so, you know, for some of the children that we work with who have deaf blindness, we have to use tactile signing to ask that question. For other children, we might use verbal. And, you know, for some children, we may use a combination of verbal and sign language. But we ask that question in a way that the child understands by saying, what do you want? What do you need? What are you missing? So we ask the command. After we've done that, then we wait a predetermined number of seconds for the child to provide the target response. And that number of seconds is going to be dependent on the child. And I don't care if I repeat this. I don't care if I sound redundant, because it's the most critical part of teaching. Every child is, especially children with low incidence disabilities. If I have a child who has a vision impairment and or a hearing impairment, if I have a child who has got physical disabilities or any combination of those, then their processing time, or a child who has an intellectual disability, their processing time is going to be slower than a typically developing child. And so therefore, I need to give enough time for that child to process what that question is, what the expectation is that I have of that child. So as we move next week in intervention planning, that's going to be an important aspect we're going to talk a lot about. So we're going to wait a predetermined number of seconds for the child to demonstrate the response. And then if the child makes the request, then we're going to give them access to whatever it wants. So if the child says spoon, an approximation of spoon, signs spoon, touches a picture of a spoon, then I'm going to give the child the spoon. Excuse me. If the child does not do it, however, then I'm going to model that response for the child in whatever way that you know, depending on what the response is. So I'm going to touch the picture and then have the child touch the picture. Or I'm going to model the sign for the child. Or I'm going to say spoon, if the child is going to say it verbally. And then if the child still doesn't do it, then I'm going to model it a second time. If after the second time that I model it and I wait, if the child still doesn't do it, then I'm going to go on and give the child then access to what it is that the child wants. I'm not going to frustrate them by continuing to ask them, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? As I oftentimes see teachers do. At whatever point the child models or the child makes the response, then I'm going to reinforce them by giving them access. Here's another way that you can look at the MAN model procedure. Some people are linear, some people like these flow charts, so I've put it in here twice. It basically says we're creating an opportunity for the child to communicate. We're delivering the command, we're waiting, see that in black there. If the child does it, then I'm going to give the child access to it. If the child doesn't do it, then I'm going to model. If the child does it, then I'm going to give them access to it. If the child doesn't do it, then I'm going to deliver the model again until eventually I give the child what the child is wanting. So it's a very simple procedure. It's probably something that you're going, oh, I want to answer that poll question again because I knew all that stuff already. Perhaps so. What we're trying to do in this training, though, is to build a level of consistency and intentionality. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to share with you all a short video of a family that Donna and I worked with last year, who we coached to use the man model procedure. And she's our star. She's one of our stars because she was did such a wonderful job in terms of learning how to do the procedure, learning how to do it with fidelity, better than a lot of the teachers that we've actually worked with have learned. So I'm going to switch now away from my PowerPoint, and I'm going to switch to my video. So what you're going to see here is that this is our little friend Peter. Back this up for just a second here. And Peter's mom is giving him small portions. So that is the environmental strategy that she's using. You see that she's clearly got his attention here. He's very motivated to want that cracker. So she's giving him small portions of it. She's going to then ask him what he wants. If he doesn't do it, then what's going to happen is that she is going to model for him the sign for more. So we'll watch a few exchanges here.
Say more. Yeah. Good job. That's my boy.
He signed and said it.
He did sign and say it.
I saw him. Peter, what do you want?
TV. Peter, say more.
Hello.
Good job. Peter, what do you want? Peter, say more. Peter, say more. More. All right. Good job, handsome. There you go.
More. More.
He had a little help from his sister.
Mom.
Peter, what do you want? Peter, say more. There you go. Good job. I feel like you're a dog right now. I'm just showing you how to do it with food. How to beg for food.
Oh, I forgot to stop it. One of the things that I really hope that you saw in there that I think was eye-opening for, that was very eye-opening for Peter's mom was how she had to wait. for him to respond. And when we first started doing this intervention with her, one of the things that she figured out that she was very surprised about was that she repeatedly was giving the man over and over and over again. So she would say to Peter, "What do you want, Peter? Peter, what do you want? Peter, tell me what you want." And that's a mistake that I see teachers make all the time, is that they think that, maybe if I ask it a little louder, or if I ask it slower, or if I ask it faster, that the child's going to get it. But in fact, what the child needs is that they need that model. They don't need for us to continue to give those mands. They need for us to give them a model so that they know and they understand what the expectation is of the child. And so her pace, as we went through the coaching sessions with her, really slowed down a great deal. And I was actually counting again as I was watching her, because on his intervention plan, she was supposed to wait 5 seconds, and she did that. And you notice that she gave the model one time and he didn't do it. She waited, she gave him the model a second time. He still didn't do it. And then she gave him a physical prompt so that he actually got some practice actually doing the skill. Later on, Peter was able to do this completely independently. He was our star child and has gone on. But the intervention was very, very effective with that particular child and with that mom. So that's an example of what the man model procedure looks like in practice. So, Carrie, do we have any questions here before we move on? Because I just looked at the time and realized that we are almost out of time.
I know, time flies when you're having fun. I don't see any questions, but a lot of people have put in the chat that this has been one of the most informative trainings that they've attended all year. So they're learning lots of really good information and skills to apply. So we are so glad for that feedback. And Donna was just sharing a little bit more information about the mom in that situation and how she said that wait time was really the most important thing that she learned.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that is.
Go ahead.
That is what we're really going to focus on next week when we start developing intervention plans. I don't really want to start on another intervention per se at this point, because I would have to rush through it. So I will see if there are any other questions, and we'll say that next week then we will carry over and we will start by talking about system of least prompts and how that can be used to teach social skills. And then we'll also be talking about the time delay procedure. And then we will move right away into the development of an intervention plan using one of the evidence-based practices that I've talked about today that you can use to implement with a child or with a family that you're working with if you're doing coaching with families. So that's what we have going on in the coming week. Please think of a child that you can focus on. This will be way more meaningful for you if you do that. And Carrie, if there are any other questions that we have, but otherwise, I think that we will wrap up right where we are today, if that's okay with you all.
Sure, that makes sense, Jennifer. I'm just going to pause really quick and do one last interpreter switch because I do know I see a question in, and then I have my slide at the end as well. So we'll do a quick pause and then I'll read the question. Okay, we're good to go. So I see that Stacy has asked, what happens if the child responds with please while engaged and waiting for the response?
So when we develop the intervention plan, we're very clear about what the expected response is. So if the child demonstrates a response that is other than what that expected response is, then we would then model what the expected response is and try to get the child to model that response. Now, if when I'm developing the intervention, if I say, I will accept please or more, then I would accept either one of those responses. But we want to know going into this, what it is that we want to expect the child to do. And oftentimes children use multiple modes of communication, multiple forms of communication for the same type of response. And so it's okay to say, the child, oftentimes when we're teaching sign language to children, young children, we might say it's okay for the child to use a sign or a vocalization, and that either one of those responses is acceptable. It just depends on how we want to write it for the child. Also, as we're advancing communication with children, it might be that we want to, there's another enhanced milieu teaching strategy called incidental teaching, which is a strategy that's actually used to build upon those single word responses. And so what we might do is that we might say that we want to teach the child, the next thing we want to teach them is more please. So we're putting two signs together. And so that might be another way that we might want to approach it. So I hope that answered your question. All right, Carrie, I'll let you take it away, and I'll look forward to seeing all of you all next Friday. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer. We appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who participated. Just give me a second. I'm going to put my last little slide up. Hopefully, bear with me. There we go. So thank you again to everyone who participated, and special thanks to Dr. Grisham and our sign language interpreters and our friends from the the Southeast Interagency Deaf Blind Projects, because they've been helping us out. I know you heard Dr. Grisham talk a lot about Donna Carpenter, and she was in the chat box providing some resources as well. So I am going to put a link in the chat box to our evaluation session, and then I'll also email it out just to make sure you have it. But if you could take a moment and provide feedback, we'd really appreciate that. You'll receive that email with the recording and with the PDF of this session by early next week. And you'll also get the link for next Friday's session on creating intervention plans. And if you'd like to learn more about SCIPI, or South Carolina Partnerships for Inclusion, you can check out our website. You can click on that subscribe button to get our monthly newsletter. You can click on the contact button to reach out to us if you have questions, or you can also email us at scpi@mailbox.sc.edu. I'm gonna put this link in the chat. Okay, the survey link is in there. I'll keep the survey open for about a week, but if you can take a minute today to provide feedback, we'd appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. We hope you have a fabulous weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye all. Thanks again.